I think it's safe to say that New Testament child raising might be described as free range, at least according to what happened to Jesus with Mary and Joseph. They figured he'd come along, and it took them a day to find out he hadn't. Sounds free range. Of course, in Jerusalem, the biggest city around, all of the perversions and possibilities of the first century are the same as they are in the 21st century. And so after 3 days' absence, I'm sure the parents were terrified. To find him in the midst of, after all of their searching, and to find him in the crowd, among the teachers in the temple, makes for the scene of relief in the story, which is most of the artistic representations we have is of the focus of Jesus there surrounded by the great teachers. The relief that Mary and Joseph felt in the scriptures is often highlighted in the art as we see Jesus in conversation with the teachers and rabbis. So much so that we skip over, as we read, the central part of the story, which was that they found him in the temple. In the temple where Jesus says, "Is my Father's house." His Father's house is in the place of sacrifice. It is the place which is the highlight, the center point of Jerusalem, the reason that people travel from all over for the Passover there, where the duties of the people to fulfill the relationship where the fulfillment of the relationship with God was enacted. Sacrifice is something that we read of and think of as primitive and pagan, perhaps. When I first went to Santiago Atitlan in Guatemala to visit, the first thing I heard were that people there, the Sutujil people, although they are Catholic, still go out to the edge of town and sacrifice at altars they build there, chickens and lizards, in obedience to their need to do what's religious for themselves. We hear such stories and think of hopeless paganism. Or we read it in the Old Testament and think it's old and outdated. But of course, sacrifice is the great insight in the human mind of the understanding of what it means to live today in preparation for tomorrow. It's one of the stunning insights that happened as the light of consciousness switched on. And we began to understand that by giving today, we receive tomorrow. And of course, for us, there's nothing Old Testament or pagan or outdated by that at all. We believe in sacrifice as much as anyone ever has. What else would we put children in school for a minimum of 12 years for? Force them to stay inside and memorize things like their phonics and the diphthongs they have to learn to read and understand as they do the impossible job of reading and then spelling English. Make them stay inside and learn their multiplication tables. When I resisted learning anything above 5 times, my mother despaired that I would ever amount to anything when it came to numbers. But we turn to our children and we say, it's for your own good, and we mean it, and it is. But it's tremendous sacrifice, both for their own freedom, of their own freedom, and of our own expense. We do this to achieve that. Sacrifice is alive and well among all of us. We excoriate voters for not investing in the taxes of today for roads and for bridges and airports and water pipes for tomorrow. And we all know that in any relationship, whether it's among spouses or in a company, the sacrifice, the comfort of today by telling the truth is so that tomorrow, we trust, will produce a greater abundance. Sacrifice is everywhere. Sacrifice is the human condition if we want to live today for tomorrow. And so as Jesus was sitting there among the rabbis and his parents found him, he described to them that he was in his Father's house, the place where sacrifice is enacted, the place where the truth of God is enacted. Because sacrifice is where the fullness of life is found. To know that tomorrow is connected to today because they are the work of life today will produce tomorrow. It's the discovery, of course, that produces a family. Because a family is the place of sacrifice and blessing. The place where we give today in order to produce tomorrow. There's this wonderful TV ad that happened this Christmas where a young boy is sitting in his living room and his mom walks in and begins to put ribbons on the thermostat and takes the TV remote and wraps it in wrapping paper, just to remind him that what he's being given for Christmas is all these things that he takes for granted. It's to remind we provide and it's a gift. But we know it's something we laugh at on TV because the truth is, inside a family, we all know it's given freely. Because it's given freely because we want it to be received as a gift. And not only just that it's received, that it's given freely and received freely, but so that when it comes time to give, the one who has received freely in his life will in turn give freely. Not to hold back and say, only if you can promise will I give, as long as you promise to give back. That's the truth of sacrifice. It's the truth of Jesus being in his Father's house. Because the gift of God to us is that God has entrusted us with everything. Even after we stumble toward ruin and greed in our lives, God gifts us with Christ's own sacrifice, offers us the free gift of our salvation, not with a bow or an ornament, so that we know it's a gift to be responsible for, but given freely, so that we'll know how to give and how to love and how to save another. Families enact that gift always, which is why the heart of the life of family giving is the heart of the life of God at work in the world. Mary Eberstadt, in her book, wrote that to give up family is to give up the future, and to give up the future is to give up God completely. Family is for receiving gifts so as to be able to give them. And what's the easiest way to describe the Christian message? What's the church for? What are Catholics after? Simply this, that God, the Father of us all, wouldn't let his children get away from him and hurt themselves as they entered the wide world. So he went where they were and gather them up again so they could live close to him. He has done what fathers do, give gifts so that we learn how to give to one another. In fact, God gives so freely that what we're promised is that we simply give our way to heaven, since that's where the true giver is. Or perhaps it's best described in a story from my own family, where one of my great uncles, who spent his whole life in a life that simply slipped through his fingers, and when it came time for him to die, he was in failing health and ended up in the hospital. The priests were called, they went up to his room, and he chased them out, insisting that since God had done nothing for him, it was time for God to leave him alone. In the course of his disease, he fell into a coma, and as the family was waiting for the final word on his condition, in a surprise to everyone, he woke up, coming out of the coma, asked to see the priest. And when the priest arrived, he said, "What's different now?" And he said, "If you had seen what I've seen over the last days, you would know that we have a God that's good and loving." He asked to receive the anointing and died later that evening. His life had been given to him as a gift. And even though he had misspent it, had stumbled into life with all of the mess that he could make, the gift that he was given was such that he could give a gift in return, even if it was only the words that he had at the end of his life. We could even give our way into heaven, since the one who gives is there. We live our lives receiving, so that in our lives we can give away, as Jesus was found in his Father's house.